Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dolika Jyoti Sharma. I am an assistant professor in English at the Department of English in Guwahati University. The module we are doing today is on Amitav Ghosh's The Hungry Tide and is in the paper on Indian writing in English. Amitav Ghosh was born on 11th July 1956 in Calcutta and belongs to a Hindu Bengali family. Ghosh received his education from the Doon School, St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and Delhi University. He studied specifically in the Delhi School of Economics, and then he went on to study at St. Edmund's Hall, Oxford. He worked as a print journalist in the Indian Express during the time of the emergency. Ghosh's most famous works include The Shadow Lines, which came out in 1986, The Calcutta Chromosome, which came out in 1995, The Glass Palace in 2000, and The Hungry Tide in 2004. His famous non-fictional works are In an Antique Land, which came out in 1992, Dancing in Cambodia and At Large in Burma, which came out in 1998, Countdown in 1999, and The Imam and the Indian in 2002. Ghosh won the Arthur C. Clarke Award for The Calcutta Chromosome and received the Sahitya Academy Award for his groundbreaking novel, The Shadow Lines. The Hungry Tide is set in the Sundarbans, which comprises more than 10,000 square kilometers. The novel is based on two main episodes. One is Piale's quest for research on dolphins, and the other is Kanai's search for the situations that led to his uncle's mysterious death in 1979. The novel recounts the event of the Maurice Chapi incident that took place in 1979, and it depicts the exploitation faced by the refugees from Bangladesh. Sundarbans, which provide the setting for The Hungry Tide, as mentioned earlier, means, quote-unquote, beautiful forest, which comprises of more than 10,000 square kilometers. The Government of India has taken steps to preserve its natural resources, which include the endangered species like the Royal Bengal tiger and the Gangetic dolphin, which are known as Orcaella. The preservation of the region has given rise to a confrontation with the local people, and this conflict provides a part of the historical background of the novel. Thus, we can see here that Amitav Ghosh is actually concerned with certain contemporary issues in countries like India, where large-scale deforestation and human encroachment into the wild has created a large number of incidents of human and animal conflict. The novel starts with the stories of Kanai Dutt and Piali Roy, who are waiting on the railway platform in Calcutta to move forward to Canning and embark on their respective quests to the Sundarbans. Kanai was a translator and an interpreter by profession. He's on his way to visit his aunt, who lives in Lusibari, the farthest of the inhabited islands of the Sundarbans. Some years back, his uncle had kept a diary for Kanai before he died, and his aunt Neelima Bose wants him to come over and have a look at it. The journey describes the confrontation of the Maurice Chapi people with the authorities that resulted in a lot of violence. The government forced the refugees to return to their resettlement camp in central India. Maurice Chapi was a tide country island, some distance away from Lusibari. It was a part of the Sundarbans which was reserved for tiger conservation. But in 1978, a large number of people, mostly these refugees, they came and settled here. These refugees were from Bangladesh, who were then exploited by the Muslim communists and the upper-class Hindus. These people had not actually come from Bangladesh, but from a resettlement camp in central India, where they were sent after the partition. The people said that it was more like a concentration camp or a jail in a place called Dandakaranya in the forests of Madhya Pradesh. In 1978, these people broke out of the resettlement camp and settled in Maurice Chapi. Since this place was a reserved forest, the government authorities declared eviction of the settlers. For almost a year, there was strong conflict between the authorities and the people. The ultimate conflict took place in the year 1979, and it remains a mystery in the novel about whether Nirmal was ever a part of it. The incidents of the Maurice Chapi are revealed through the papers left by Nirmal for Kanai. Some of the central themes and issues in the novel surround environmentalism and destabilization in India during that period. The geographical location of the Sundarbans serves as a significant metaphor in the novel. The physical environment is a representation of an active force that connects the plant, animal, and human life together, and one is affected by the other directly or indirectly. The topographic features, the habitats of the animals, the everyday life and habits of the people, and professions of this tide country are responsible for the formation of their communities. In the novel, we see a coexistence among various kinds of people, rich or poor, or educated and ignorant, the local and the outsiders. All these people face the same consequences while encountering the environment, which comprises dense forests, rivers, snakes, crocodiles, fish, tigers, and also the terrible natural disasters like cyclones and terrible storms. The environment is not only important to form the narrative structure of the novel, but it also highlights the mystery and fate of an individual's existence, even in the midst of a dangerous but at the same time a beautiful specimen of nature, the Mohana. The people living in close proximity with nature have their own myths and legends about Mother Nature in this particular delta. Here in this novel, we have the Bon Bibi myth that is necessary in the formation of an identity for the people of this tide country who believe so much in the myths, customs, and rituals of the Sundarban jungle and its influence upon their lives. The concept of the jungle is a distinct paradigm which shows the differences between the civilized on one hand and the uncivilized people on the other. Zimmerman provides an interesting idea about this concept of a jungle when he says, quote, "The jungle, like the human body, provides a favored context for a conceptualization of the relations between the outside and the inside, between wildness and culture, and at an even deeper level for a dialectic between the pure and the impure," unquote. In The Hungry Tide, Ghosh has depicted nature's resistance towards its regimentation and strict categorization. We clearly see that nature has its own workings that are beyond human control in the events that take place in the novel. In the Sundarbans, the boundaries collapse and rivers merge with each other. Amitav Ghosh's novel thus explores the theme of destabilization, which is caused mainly by globalization. So on one hand, we have environmentalism, and on the other, we have Ghosh exploring the impact of globalization on the environment and on people's attitudes and responses to the environment. Now, this is based on the novel is based on a true historical incident, as has been mentioned earlier, the Maurice Chapi incident, which actually happened in history, and it also concerns itself with the issues of the environment, its protection and its conservation of the Sundarbans. Ghosh here shows the conflict between the refugees and the government authorities and also focuses on the suffering of the settlers in a hostile environment where they have no other place to go. Kusum, one of the revolutionaries of the Maurice Chape incident, fights for the cause of the settlers and regards it as a severe injustice of evicting these people who are otherwise homeless. She recalls the entire event of the coming of these settlers to the island of Maurice Chape. The novel brings to light the politics behind the enforcement of forest acts and conservation rules, and also highlights the indifferent attitude of the politicians across borders that treat these poor refugees with violence. In The Hungry Tide, Amitav Ghosh describes the impact of globalization upon the people of the islands of the Sundarbans, who are considered isolated and removed from modern-day technologies and advancements. Through the characters of Nilima and Nirmal, Ghosh exemplifies how far modern technology and thoughts have reached these people of the Tide country. Nilima works for the Bodhabon Trust, and it is told that, quote, the hospital's equipments had come from the donors, some from India and some from foreign. There was a diagnostic laboratory, an X-ray room, and even a dialysis machine, unquote. The people of the small island of Lucibari have utilized the resources necessary for building a hospital which would ensure a safe and healthy living for its people. The hospital has many modern tools and equipment which is made possible through the process of globalization. Moina trains herself as a nurse and learns the skill of saving and helping needy people. This shows how the effect of globalization has also proved beneficial to the rural and ignorant people. Quote, we give the nurses some basic training in hygiene, nutrition, first aid, midwifery, and other things that might be useful. How to cope with drowning, for example. For that's a situation they often have to face. The training given to the nurses in the novel also shows how modern technologies and developments are not only circulated through globalization, but they are also adapted to fulfill the requirements of various people at a locality. Through the novel, Ghosh hints at the fact that globalization has far-reaching impacts upon the people who are considered backward and uncivilized. It is, in a way, ambivalent if we talk about globalization and its impact on people, because on one hand, globalization provides access to essential scientific and technological developments to the poor and the needy in third world countries, for want of a better word. But at the same time, it does also it also embodies a certain kind of exploitation of these very people. Through globalization, even these sections of people have benefited a lot, and the transfer of knowledge and effect of communication paves the way for further education and advancement in technologies and ideas. However, as I just mentioned, Ghosh shows the negative aspects of globalization as well. This is seen in the inhuman and indifferent attitude shown by the urban people towards the settlers of the Maurice Chape. Nirmal's journal documents the situation of discrimination and oppression done to the refugees there. Moreover, some of the environmentalists and the people who are engaged in the tourism industry promote the preservation of wildlife, especially the tigers, without ever visiting the Sundarbans and even knowing the suffering of the people who live in this part of the country. Terry Tomsky, in the essay Amitav Ghosh's Anxious Witnessing and the Ethics of Action in The Hungry Tide, says that, quote, Bengal's Sundarbans epitomize subalternity. It is a region that, until the advent of its environmental significance, was seen as inconsequential in the political and economic calculus of the nation state, unquote. unquote. The lives of animals are supposed to have more significance than that of the people living in the Sundarbans, as the wildlife yields more revenue from the visiting tourists. Not only that, the elite section of people feel a sense of detachment towards the subaltern settlers of this region. This sense of detachment, in turn, arises from a feeling of superiority of class and ethnocentrism. In this context, Chomsky again observes, quote, "In order to be an ethically engaged cosmopolitan, one must be sensitive to particularities and local conditions," unquote. They must learn to identify with the other, is Chomsky's opinion. In the novel, Kanai, who lives in New Delhi, cannot relate to the people of the islands of the Sundarbans when he comes to Lucibari. Thrown into an entirely different region that this tide country was, Kanai was unable to treat the people there with equality, as we see with the case of Fakir, who is considered inferior by him due to their class differences. Through his novel, Ghosh tries to bring to light the idea that the lives of the subalterns can be improvised through the process of globalization only if the cosmopolitans move beyond the established social norms and social and class discrimination. The narrative structure of The Hungry Tide is centered on a historical backdrop, that of the Maurice Chappé event. There is a constant shuffling of past and present events in the novel. The past incidents are mostly related to Maurice Chappé, which we come to know from Nirmal's journal. So Nirmal's journal works in terms of a text within the text of The Hungry Tide. The present story comprises Piale's research in the islands and the lives of other characters in the novel, namely Nilima, Fakir, Moina, Tutul, among others. Ghosh makes us realize that it is the layers of human history, together with the collaboration of past knowledge, experience and memory, that enhances our understanding of a particular place or region. The setting of the Sundarbans in The Hungry Tide is central to its narrative structure. The place is believed to have derived its name from the mangroves called Sundari. Should I begin? Okay. Just let me read first.
Just excuse me for a second. This is narrative structure, right? So is it okay if I use a note that it should be placed after narrative structure? Because she has put it after the narrative structure for everything. You have explained.
Narrative structure. No,
After the narrative structure, so now, whatever ma'am says, it has to be put before and after the narrative structure. That's what I understand.
Okay. And I take it up a bit. Lower down. Lower. আৰু তললে গৈ থাকা তুমি এটা লাহে লাহে গৈ থাকা হ'ব The setting of Sundarbans in The Hungry Tide is quite essential for the narrative structure of the novel. The Sundarbans are named after the mangrove trees, which are popularly known as Sundari in that region, which is why the name Sundarbans. Now, this region is a rich zone of biodiversity as the land gives way to the water, to the ocean. The rivers break down into distributaries and they join the ocean. Now, this biodiversity again straddles, as I said earlier, straddles two different realms, that of land and water. Now, the narrative structure of the novel is also, in a way, a conglomerate of two different ways of seeing the Sundarbans. One is Piali's westernized idea of the environment, and the other is Fakir's take on the Sundarbans, because he's within that environment, within that habitat. So we find the place like the Sundarbans, all right, in a way becoming the narrative site where these two different ways of looking into the environment come together and reach a certain kind of dialogue. So the dialogue in the narrative between the two narratives of Fakir and Piali, all right, and of course that of Nirmal, which provides the subtext, as it were, on which these two narratives will be based, all right, are in a way reenactments of the Sundarbans, where all these diverse strains, even to take the Maurice Chapi people, all of them have come together and have started to exist, as it were, on such a level of dialogue. Ghosh is gifted with an excellent sense of place, thus, and of course this is part of, this is characteristic of him in all his novels. Towards the end of the novel, towards the end of the narrative rather, we find therefore Amitav Ghosh trying to explore through narrative, explore the possibility of whether the Western ideas on the environment and the Western idea of, say, wilderness, of creating reservations, for we have to remember that wildlife parks and reservations in India are a colonial presence. It is not as if India had originally had reserves or national parks. So this is very much a Western cultural aspect thrown on, or not even thrown rather, but imposed on countries like India. Now, Amitav Ghosh, from his post-colonial vantage point, is questioning whether such an absolute external imposition is ever justified, and is it ever tenable. So we find that Piali's own approach to the environment undergoes a certain change after she comes across Fakir. And Fakir, in a way, as much as Nirmal, they provide ways for Piali to come to terms with the environment in the Sundarbans on its own terms, not as merely an object, all right, to be looked at, analyzed externally, objectively, but something, an existence itself, a living existence, a living entity in which she also becomes an active participant. So if we look at the keynotes, as it were, of reading, the key points of reading The Hungry Tide, we first have to inevitably start with the question of the environment. But at the same time, as Ramchandra Guha in his writings on environment and human relations in India and similar countries, the question of environment does not exist without the presence of the other crucial question of human subsistence. So while we might talk about reservations or wilderness, where we might talk about conserving forests, conserving animals, endangered animals, which are important in their own right, they have a value in their own right, we cannot, however, escape the fact that there are significant sections of human society who have always lived in close relation with that environment, and whose very subsistence, whose very survival depends on such a life, such an organically bonded life. with the environment. Ghosh takes up the nuances of this problem, of this problem of enforcing certain rigid external rules as far as the conservation of the environment, conservation of nature goes, and its severe impact on the indigenous people who have always lived there and who have no other option, who do not have access to advanced technology or a greater economic security. So in The Hungry Tide, therefore, we find Ghosh speaking from a very self-conscious third world, quote-unquote third world context, and looking at environmental issues and interrogating certain key aspects of environmentalism as it appears in the West. And with this, we come to the end of the module. Thank you.